Hey, I'm delighted to be joined by Congressman Khanna, representing California. Thanks for doing this kind of last minute. It's Saturday morning, so obviously a lot can change over the next 48 hours with Monday as I guess the agreement between Speaker Pelosi and moderate Democrats. I call them Republicans within the Democratic Party. But before we get to, obviously, you and I have some disagreements on the strategy here. I thought it was kind of nice that CNN finally told people what's in this deal yesterday. You haven't really heard anything about what's in the deal other than the horse race going back and forth. Can you kind of explain to progressives who, might be a little dejected, after the Bernie movement and whatnot, why this deal is not, incremental progress, but bold, significant, game-changing policies?
Well, Jordan, first of all, good to be on the show. Appreciate all the work you've done on Flint, Michigan. It is particularly of interest to me because we've had a lead issue at an airport in San Jose with kids have had lead in their blood given lead fuel, and we're trying to close that airport. So I really appreciate your work on that, and appreciated the back and forth on Twitter. I'm usually when people criticize me, which I don't take it personally, I view that as First Amendment debate, and great to be on. Yeah, I mean, look, this is going to be a massive bill that will help working class families and people who are struggling in this country. It has childcare, and no one is going to pay more than 7% of their income for childcare if this passes. It has universal preschool. It has expansion so you can finally get dental care, dentures, hearing aids, vision, your eyeglasses covered. It's going to make community college free. It's going to give you paid family leave. So if you have to look after a sick parent or a kid, you can get time off without having to lose your job or lose your salary. These are policies progressives have been championing for decades, and finally we have it. And then it has some of the boldest climate provisions ever. I mean, a clean energy standard that by 2035 would get us to 100% clean electricity, and massive investments in renewable energy. So progressives have always said that this has to be one package. One of the reasons is we weren't part of the bipartisan infrastructure. We wouldn't have signed off on the bipartisan infrastructure deal, just investing in highways and roads without an environmental component. I mean, you can't do that and not have the electricity, electric vehicles. You can't do that and kick out electric buses, which is what they did. They took out DeFazio's, who's not a progressive. I mean, he's a chair of the transportation committee. I'd call him a mainstream Democratic liberal, and they took out his proposal. So you can't do just the old infrastructure without a focus on climate. So we were clear saying, okay, if you don't want to include us in the process, we're not going to sink it, but you have to have the whole bill. You have to have the climate provisions for us to vote for it. And that's why there are 40 to 50 of us who are prepared on Monday to vote no if the speaker brings it.
So let's get to Monday. I find that positive because, frankly, I mean, you hear the noise. There's a whole lot of people in the progressive movement who have wanted you to leverage your votes. So I think that's a good first step. The question I have is I've been seeing, Congresswoman Jayapal, chair of the Progressive Change Caucus, Progressive Congressional Caucus, excuse me, Bernie, some others with kind of the same talking points, at least in TV interviews, that we're not going below 3.5 trillion. Whether that's their actual position or not, they've been signaling that. You were on CNN yesterday basically saying we don't have a red line, meaning we'll go below that.
Are you going to vote no if that House Budget Reconciliation Act, the Build Back Better Act, isn't introduced and doesn't pass first?
I will vote no if we don't have an agreement. What we have said is let's have an agreement where Senator Sinema, Senator Manchin, the White House, progressives are on the same page, both on the Build Back Better Act and on the Infrastructure Act. I think we can get to an agreement. No one is saying it has to be passed. Every single detail has to be worked out. Let's just have a framework. The House progressives, we have a proposal. We're waiting on a counteroffer.
An agreement that Sinema, Manchin, and the House Democrats unanimously will support the Build Back Better Act, the $3.5 trillion bill.
Right, but we're willing to negotiate.
I don't personally, with all due respect, I think that's pretty bad negotiation tactics. I think why not go with a hard line, vote no, actually turn the pressure on the Manchins, the Sinemas, the Gottheimers in the House And also, I personally don't understand why the first talking point isn't pointing out that Joe Manchin himself in January said, the most important thing, do infrastructure, spend $2, $3, $4 trillion over a 10-year period on infrastructure. So it seems to me, at least on CNN yesterday, you were basically already signaling that we will go further and further towards the corporatists when, I mean, all you need to say is we're just doing what Joe Manchin called for in January. I am, maybe some progressives don't agree with this. I'm not naive. You probably will have to go below 3.5 trillion. But I think by signaling it now that you're willing to, don't you think that ends up getting an even more watered down deal?
Well, first of all, I agree with you on the $4 trillion talking point. You don't get all your points in, and that was probably one I should make and will make, and agree with you. We should start out with the fact that this is the president's bill. I don't remember if I said that on the CNN interview or not, but it's actually a compromise below what even President Biden put out. It's a compromise with Senator Warner and the moderates to begin with. We started out at $6 trillion. And it's less than what Joe Manchin had said. And so, if I didn't hit all of those points, I have in other interviews, but I agree with emphasizing that. I also don't speak for the Progressive Caucus. Pramila does, and she will be making with the caucus's recommendations the ultimate decision. But there are those of us who have said what matters is what's in the bill. If you told me they're going to take out the clean energy standard or take out environmental key climate provisions, or they're going to gut key programs. In fact, I said that. What do they want to cut? Then I think you're not going to have the votes there. If it's a matter of, are we going to fund it 5 years or 7 years, and that there is some negotiation, all I said is yes, we're not going to be unwilling to negotiate if we can get things that are going to improve the American people's lives. But I also said that that's probably a matter of weeks. So it's not like we're doing that to try to avoid a vote of no. We've all been pretty clear that we will vote no. But of course we would negotiate. I mean, in terms of if someone said we're going to get childcare, we're going to get free public college, we're going for community college, we're going to get a universal pre-K, and there are robust climate provisions, and you're going to be able to have broadband and all of the good things. Of course, we would be irresponsible not to engage in that kind of conversation. And the reality is Manchin's in a very different place than Sinema. I mean, Manchin is representing a 30% Republican state. Sinema, you've got Mark Kelly going along with the president's agenda. So I actually think the challenge is going to be convincing Sinema.
So what do you say, and I'm saying it, what do you say to people, including me, that that's a bad strategy? The fact of the matter is, progressives said vote for Biden and we will fight him on day one. That was Bernie's position. Just get rid of Trump. We'll fight him. I mean, it's been pretty much collegial going along with him in the 1.9 trillion COVID relief bill, for example. The only real policy he ran on, Congressman Khanna, was a $15 minimum wage. And he preemptively basically succumbed to an unelected, non-binding advisor saying you can't have it in here. I didn't really see progressives fight on that. Biden ran on a public option for healthcare, which I think we agree is not enough. That's been lost in the Washington vernacular. Now they're talking about, Obamacare subsidies. It seems like you've already compromised, and many would say kind of just folded the tent preemptively. So why should you compromise even beyond? You say, of course, we're going to negotiate, but you've already kind of, I would say, negotiated by forestalling and not really fighting for, big picture policies that forget what you got, what we want, what Biden ran on. So I don't really get why the strategy wouldn't be, and granted, I'm not in DC, maybe I have an outsider's point of view. Why not say, this many people wanted 6 trillion. We've already gone down to 3.5 trillion. Now myself, Senator Sanders, the whole gang is going to West Virginia, is going to Arizona. Instead of trying to negotiate with corporatists, go on these people's front doors and put pressure on them. It seems to me Manchin's Sinema, they never actually have pressure on them because the media kind of slobbers over them as centrists. And the progressives, it doesn't really seem there's any rallying the base. I think that's one thing progressives, I don't agree with progressives who have called you all sellouts and all those things, but it doesn't really seem like you're rallying the troops because they would follow you if they see you fighting.
Well, Jordan, let me tell you where I agree and where I disagree. First, I obviously would have liked to see Bernie Sanders to be president. Not everyone probably will know this. Some may, that I was a co-chair of his campaign. I dedicated over a year and a half of my life to try to get him to be president. Would I rather he had been president so we have our agenda? Of course. So we came close. It shows, I think, a progressive can become president. We weren't able to get into the final 10 yards and win it. But I will say that I do think Biden today is very different than the Biden who ran as a candidate. He has adopted a lot of progressive policies. Let me be clear where. First of all, on the CARES Act, I mean, the child tax credit was a big deal. I mean, it has actually something that Sanders was talking about, making it refundable. It is something that is going to go to families, that's cutting child poverty. We need to make it permanent. I mean, that actually was a significant policy issue. $15 minimum wage, I agree with you. I had called and publicly led 23 House members to say that we ought to overrule the parliamentarian. I don't understand this parliamentarian business. No one knows who she is. I don't understand why we care about what she has to say on these issues. The vice president has the authority and the precedent to overturn that. I led a letter pushing for that. I got pushback saying, why are you taking on the administration so early on? We had a press conference with Reverend Barber and the late Richard Trumka on that. And we did actually push and fight for that to the extent we can in Congress. So that was not something where we just gave a pass and said, oh, okay, who cares on the $15 wage? We organized, we pushed, we've continued to push on that. On foreign policy,
but is pushing, writing a letter? I mean, I've seen a lot of letters written to Biden, Pelosi. I get you have to be somewhat diplomatic in there, but like it doesn't. I see what happened with President Obama, where he created this massive organizing army as a candidate, and then he just didn't tap into it and started basically starting on the Republicans' 50-yard line in negotiations and giving them half the farm right out of the bat. Bernie has a massive army. I think there are tons of progressives who right now feel leaderless. I'm not saying you to go in there, figurative, guns a-blazing, but it just seems to me you're sending letters, making calls for. I mean, there's a lot of progressive organizations that didn't exist 5 years ago. Why aren't the tactics a little bit more aggressive and tapping into, an army of activists around the country to challenge the president on not putting the $15 minimum wage in there and several other things?
I'm open to those ideas. We did try to mobilize. We worked with Sarah Jairam, Saru Jairam and One Fair Wage. We tried to work with labor. We tried to work with other organizations in the mobilization with tipped workers, because some tipped workers are only making a little over $2.13. So we did try to mobilize on that. I'm all for ideas on how we can mobilize to get $15 into a must-pass bill. And if there is a mobilization, I agree that that's something we ought to deliver. That's something the president ran on. That's sort of fundamental to improving life for the working class. And when you don't have the ability, forget it, for a one-parent income, even two-parent income to make ends meet with kids, $15 isn't going to solve that, but it would be a step in a productive direction. So I agree with you that we need to mobilize on that. But my point is, I and others haven't been hesitant to be vocally critical of the administration and not pushing for $15. On foreign policy, I do think that the president showed courage in getting out of Afghanistan. I mean, we can debate the details, but that was I think a lot of progressive mobilization around the country against endless wars that has had an impact. We have made an impact on Yemen. I mean, my amendment just passed again, 219 to 207. We're mobilizing around the country to say, don't strip it out of the NDAA. A lot of Biden administration officials supported that as private citizens. They must support that now. That's the biggest humanitarian crisis in the world. And we're mobilizing.
By the way, thank you for leading on that. You've been one of the few leading on that for many years.
Well, I appreciate. I mean, it's just a humanitarian disaster. And Bernie Sanders said I had passed the war powers resolution that's somewhat improved the situation, but still not nearly enough. And the Saudis commit atrocities. The on climate, I mean, we are demanding that there be real bold provisions before we vote for anything. And I guess a lot of those provisions are things Bernie ran on. They're not as bold, but they are making it in to the agenda. I mean, the climate stuff, the free public college, the child care, the universal preschool, the expansion of Medicare benefits. Obviously, if they cut a lot of these things systematically, or they start to make significant cuts, will be a no. But if all we've said is we're a no currently, if you don't have a strong, robust Build Back Better bill, the reconciliation part, we're willing to vote no. So it's not like we're trying to finagle out of a no vote. If the vote came in 1 hour, I'd be a no, and so would 40 or 50 other folks. So unless there's some miraculous proposal in the next 48 hours, that's where we're headed. But we want to continue the conversation, and if we can get substantive parts of the progressive agenda through, we will be a yes, realizing we got to get more progressives elected to the House and to the Senate. In terms of mobilization, I think the mobilization we need is to get more progressives into the House elected and into the Senate elected. I'm not sure mobilizing in Manchin's district, where Trump carried it by 30%, is actually what's going to move him on these policies.
Well, Manchin is, he's all of West Virginia, not a district. And I would remind you, Bernie won every county in West Virginia. So it seems to me by the polls, the people of West Virginia want the majority of what's in this. I'll also remind you, Joe Manchin didn't win by that much for Senate back in 2018. He narrowly won. I want to drill back into something, because I think a lot of people, progressives, are listening to your last statement saying, I think really what needs to happen mobilization wise is getting more progressives in here. But at the same time, they would say, well, I knocked on doors for AOC, the rest of them. I volunteered, I donated, et cetera, et cetera.
No, that's great.
And technically we've had numbers for months to basically block most legislation, at least in the House. We could debate the wisdom of that, but we got them in. So the organization has happened. Do we have majorities? No. Yet there's not really been until now. There hasn't really been much coordination, voting as a block, and actually leveraging one's vote. So what would you say to people that would say, yeah, I'm not going to keep pushing to elect more progressives if they're going to continue preemptively folding? And what we think should be the mobilization.
Reading how far
Oh, go ahead.
I think that's misreading how far we've come. I mean, remember when Barack Obama in 2008 did the financial crash, which is arguably even a greater economic crisis than we had during COVID. I mean, or at least it's comparable. And he had to debate whether he could get a 750 or 800 billion stimulus check, and people were concerned about austerity politics, and there wasn't a focus on the working class or the poor with the child tax credit. And now Biden starts out where we're getting 1.9 trillion, and there's not the conversation on deficits, and there is a focus on the child tax credit, and there is a stimulus. Monthly checks that are going out to people, actually giving them checks. That we've come a long way from the conversation in the Obama years, and I don't think that that's suddenly that Joe Biden has transformed in all his thinking from when he was in the Obama administration. I think he is a person who has always been sensitive to where the party is, and he understands that the progressives have a huge voice in the party, including the people that many of you have helped elect in the Congress. So we can debate whether we've come far enough, whether we're tough enough, strong enough, but no one can debate that the progressives who have been in Congress have moved the debate because of the base significantly in a progressive direction, and a rejection of neoliberalism, which I define as deindustrialization, offshoring of jobs, radical privatization, which led to depressed wages where people can no longer support their families and communities. And that picture is something that I would argue that even Joe Biden now recognizes and is trying to address.
Let me ask you, I don't want to relitigate forced to vote. Obviously, that's I was for it. I still think you should do those tactics. But what is the actual strategy now among progressives? Obviously, the focus right now is on this 3.5 trillion bill. what is the actual strategy to achieve Medicare for all? I understand we don't have the White House, but I don't think progressives could just kind of like take 4-year pauses in trying to obtain this just because we don't have the White House or Congress. Is there a a coherent strategy among progressives in Congress to keep fighting for Medicare for all?
There is, but first of all, I do think that the president matters, and I think any progressive, anyone quote unquote running as a progressive in the beginning, should just embrace the Sanders Medicare for All bill, and that shouldn't be. We had to litigate that, and people going all over the place on the different candidates. There are a lot of issues that progressives may disagree on. I think that ought to be a prerequisite if you want to be the presidential candidate for a progressive movement or in contention, to support Medicare for all and make that a priority in getting that through. And I do think, obviously, having the presidency matters. That said, we don't, but we still have important positions in the Senate and House. This is why Medicare expansion matters so much, and why Senator Sanders is absolutely right to insist on it. Because if we expand Medicare and we start with the seniors and they start getting dental and hearing and they start getting vision, they'll say, oh, this is what they meant with Medicare for all. This is what Bernie was talking about. Well, this isn't socialized radical medicine. This just means that I get more ability to have a healthy life, that I have more choice in my medical options. And then let's do it till 60, so we start to move the age and slowly expand while we don't have the presidency. And even Bernie was a 4-year plan, so it went to 55, 45, 35. So let's start taking directions and expanding Medicare, both in terms of benefits and in terms of age. And that, I think, is the strategy in Congress, which is why the Medicare expansion fight is such a critical one in this reconciliation bill.
And what do you, I know you're not going to give me a firm number, but you say the number doesn't matter. I think it does. I mean, are we talking?
It matters. It matters within reason. Obviously.
Right. Well, let's talk about that reason. So, like, to me, I personally, I would say no, anything below 3 trillion. I mean, you've already gone down from 6 trillion, which, according to Bernie, a lot of the caucus believed in 6 trillion. To me, when you're dealing with, the Mansions of the world, the Gottheimers of the world, they're probably shooting closer to 2 trillion. So what is that red line in terms of where you won't go?
I don't even think they're at 2 trillion from the conversations. I think they're well south of that. Let me ask you this, though. What would you, hypothetically, someone comes up with a number and you say no, and then that means, let's say, Sinema and others are, okay, we don't want to do anything, because they'd be fine with that. It's not like they have that much vested in universal child care and preschool and the environmental provisions. You would be fine risking sort of nothing compared to doing something.
Well, I think that's always the simplistic framing. I would say this is about more than just this bill. I think at a certain point, some people, for example, thought Bernie should have tried to delay and block the first CARES Act in 2020 during the beginning of the pandemic because it was an upward transfer of wealth. I didn't agree with that because people desperately needed unemployment.
Right.
And, but now, to me, these are desperately needed programs. But at the same time, at a certain point, if progressives don't actually show, no, we will not kind of just say yes to severely watered down neoliberal legislation, because it's not just the number that would go down. You're talking a lot of the programs would be cut, changed, et cetera, et cetera. I think progressives need to show the Democratic Party, particularly, the leadership, and even if the leadership was originally for the 3.5 trillion, that we're not going to continue basically folding. And that would be my position.
That's why we're willing to vote no on the bipartisan infrastructure deal. But I don't think a reconciliation bill that's negotiated, let's see what form. Obviously, they cut key climate provisions, cut key provisions on childcare and universal preschool and paid family leave and free community college. Then yes, okay, if all they have in there are provisions on certain infrastructure improvements, then yes, you are watering down. My guess is that a lot of these provisions are things that have been progressive aspirations, Bernie's aspirations for the past 2 decades. And if we can get a significant amount of that, you will have a lot of people saying yes. But a lot of the details matter, right? I mean, if they start to gut it in ways that aren't significantly building on a progressive vision, that matters. And if they're not willing to raise taxes on wealthy people, that matters. And so it's a balancing call of, are we really making headway towards a progressive agenda, or are we not? It's harder for progressives because we want desperately these things to pass. This is why many of us came to Congress. We deeply believe we need childcare, we need universal preschool, we need climate legislation, and we're not willing to just let 2, 3, 4 years pass just to make a political point. If we can get substantive legislation. On the other hand, we don't want to not to have the paradigm remain the same in the status quo. I do believe we've succeeded in shifting the president's paradigm to a more progressive vision. I think, in voting no on this infrastructure bill, which we're willing to do, which will either result in its failure or Pelosi not bringing it to the floor on Monday, are making a clear sense of that the progressive caucus can't be ignored. And then I think it becomes a negotiation, which I hope succeeds, but there's no guarantee.
And isn't there a bit of a risk in deflating the progressive bases for the next elections? Because I don't think this is, I don't think it's all progressives, but there is, I mean, you see it, there's a large swath of the progressive movement that is now shifting to screw it all. We're going to go outside of electoral politics. These people said, ran on, let's bring the ruckus to the Democratic Party. We feel they're doing a little bit too much inside negotiating and not really bringing that forceful fight. I disagree with you. I think it would make a big difference actually going to Joe Manchin's doorstep. You might say they don't care. Well, Bernie's AOC's former staffers started a super PAC. One of the first things they did was put ads on the air in West Virginia when Joe Manchin was saying he's not going to do $2,000 checks earlier this year. And he started walking that back when he got a little pressure. So, I mean, are you not concerned at all? I get focusing on what would be achieved, but what is the risk if you're deflating the base who think you're not fighting hard enough?
Well, one, I think the base will look at what we are achieving. And if we're getting significant progressive wins, like getting out of Afghanistan, which the president deserves credit, but so does the progressive movement. If we're getting a child refundable tax credit, if we're getting universal child care, preschool, we can say, look, we should be honest, we didn't get $15. Here's where we fell short, but here's where we're advancing things, keep helping us build so that we can have a progressive era, a new progressive era. Remember, progressive era in 1895, it took 15, 20 years for the progressive movement to have an impact. The New Deal was over at least 10, 15 years. The Great Society was over 10 years. So to think with a president who was largely a centrist, got elected as a centrist, is moving to the left, that suddenly we're going to achieve the entire progressive vision, I think is unrealistic. The question is, are we making progress? That said, I don't have any problem with someone who says, I think the best use of my talents, my passion, are not being dedicating myself full time to the Democratic Party. Obviously, it's in my interest to say they should, but some of the great leaders, Martin Luther King, Cesar Chavez, were not people of the party. They worked with the party, but they pressured the party. They protested the party. They mobilized outside the party. And if there are people who want to mobilize and protest and take stands to hold Democrats' feet to the fire, to hold progressives' feet to the fire, I think that's healthy for democracy. So my view is what would be awful is if people just sat at home and if they got deflated about progress in this country. As long as they are expressing their activism, I'd love for a lot of that to be for the progressive democratic causes, but I understand if they feel that their activism is better expressed through outside the system, and they're also necessary ultimately to make progress.
And last question, you've taken, I think, brave stands on Yemen and war powers. I think Rashida Tlaib, Ilhan Omar, taken really brave stands on Palestine. Why is it we can't get any progressives to talk about Julian Assange? It seems like this issue that is so obvious in terms of the First Amendment journalism, but I just literally an Al Jazeera English reporter yesterday asked the press secretary, Jen Psaki, and she just dodged. It just seems like, obviously the 3.5 trillion deal is the focus right now, but I just haven't heard any elected progressives talk about what I view as, a political prisoner being tortured. President Obama chose not to prosecute Julian Assange. Obviously, Trump did. We could debate why, but I mean, the media didn't cover it. One of the few witnesses just came out saying he lied. This was an Icelandic man. There was coercion by the FBI in that case. I don't understand, why is this not more of a topic among you and other progressives to challenge President Biden to, end this farce of a prosecution?
Well, let me answer the question, Jordan, but let me just say, in addition to Yemen, I think where we have taken on the status quo and the interest, and when I started in Congress as a freshman, I was taking on my own leadership, and Bernie Sanders was willing to do that in the Senate. There are two other places where I think we have really made an impact. Bernie Sanders and I did the Stop Bezos Act, where we took on directly Amazon and Amazon's power, and it led to Amazon raising the wages to $15. And I am chairing the subcommittee of the environment, where we are going to have Exxon, Chevron, BP, and Shell come to my committee and testify, the CEOs. First time in history, it's going to be like the big tobacco hearings. And it is because I, as committee chair, along with Carolyn Maloney, are willing to use every tool in our toolbox to get these executives finally before us. So that's going to be a big moment. Those are just two other moments where I do think there's been bold leadership. Now to your specific question on Assange, I've been on the record on this, that I thought that the indictment was overbroad. I believe that you should be prosecuted if you're actually engaged in the hacking of information on a computer server, or actually facilitating someone to get classified information. But if you are engaged as in publishing, and you are the recipient of that information, then I feel that an indictment is too broad and can have chilling effects on the First Amendment and on journalists. So I don't defend Assange from a perspective of substance or morality as others do. But I do think that the indictment was overbroad, and I have First Amendment concerns on the prosecution.
What are your more morality concerns? The release. I mean,
Well,
he released war crimes.
I mean, I have to look through everything. I mean, I don't want to. I haven't studied his, everything, what he's done or hasn't done. I know so I haven't studied the issue about him, and nor do I feel like, as a United States congressman, it would be that I need to do that. But I can speak out on the First Amendment issue. I mean, for me, that is the job is for me to make sure that I'm defending speech and defending publishing, not figuring out a substantive position on the merits of what anyone publishes or writes. And I mean, I will if it's Joe Biden or the Speaker or members of Congress. But I feel for this and the line in which I'm articulating the First Amendment and the overbroad indictment is also one which I think a lot of progressives should be able to get behind.
Well, as an independent journalist who certainly is not anywhere near in the same league as Julian Assange, I would definitely ask you and other progressives to really move this up the priority list, regardless of what you think of Julian Assange. This is journalistic, First Amendment journalistic freedom. If they could go after Assange and essentially criminalize whistleblowing, they will go after myself, other more high-profile independent reporters for just about anything. And if that becomes normalized, that's just as dangerous as the things people were ranting about that Trump was doing. So I really hope you guys could reassess that and maybe fight a little louder. Last thing you want, if you had a response.
Yeah, no, I agree that we have to defend people's right to publish. I, again, draw a distinction between people who are actively engaged in supporting hacking or getting classified information. I don't think people should be doing that proactively, and that should be prosecuted. But if they are simply recipients, passive recipients from a source of that information, and they publish it, that's the Pentagon Papers, that's the Afghan Papers.
I mean, you think the Washington Post was saying, yeah, send it to me if you want. Obviously, they were actively encouraging Daniel Ellsberg, who's considered a hero. So I think that's a bit of a distinction without a difference.
Well, I mean, I think legally there's a way to define it. And I think Wyden and I, we actually tried to introduce something. It's a couple of years ago. I'll have to look at it, about protecting journalism which basically tries to make this distinction that if a journalist is getting something from a source but not actively involved in the collection of that classified information or encouraging, where they're facilitating the breach, that they should be allowed to publish it. And that protects things like the Pentagon Papers and will probably preserve journalistic integrity for a lot of journalistic expression for a lot of people who are independent. So that, I don't think we're that far apart.
Yeah, I mean, the last thing I would say is there is no evidence Julian Assange helped Chelsea Manning hack anything. Chelsea Manning already had access to all of it. So, and the actual indictment against him was very vague. Didn't have.
I do think it's
specifics.
overbroad. Yeah, overbroad and vague. I do have concerns on that.
Well, thank you, Congressman Khanna, for taking time. Hopefully we could stay in touch.
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. Take care.
Thank you.